All right. Okay, so let's talk about UX and UI. They're not necessarily the same. UX is the name user experience is somewhat what an architect might be. Right? An architect might not actually implement anything. They might do lots of drawings, lots of design efforts, and really decide how things are going to interact with one another. But then the actual implementation might be left over to perhaps senior developers or junior developers, right, to actually implement it. And UI is a little bit one of the ways that we would be implementing a user experience strategy, right? So UX is more the strategic point of view of how is it that we're going to build something that's going to interact with a human being, right? Depending on what their users' needs are, and try to map that to an overall user experience that best addresses the user's needs. A user interface is kind of like the tactical part of this, right? How are we going to actually implement that particular strategy? So one is part of the strategy, whereas the other one is part of the tactical actual implementation of those strategies, right? Where a user interface might be, well, to implement that strategy, we'll make this button red, or we'll make this form this rounded or square, or this color scheme, or of more the look and feel of what is that we're going to implement it, but always driven from an overall user experience. So user experience is more about seeing what the user needs, and try to see what technologies there are, what metaphors could we use, right, in a computer, right, to try and map what the user mental model might have of the world, and try to make it as easy as possible to use what the user already knows, right, to make it easier for them to use our system, right? And that's and for instance, that's why that's why perhaps the Mac had a great success when it came out, is that it used this metaphor of windows and mouse and dragging things around and documents and icons. It created this metaphor that made it just easier for everybody to understand what it was, right? The command line was just too daunting for most users to make any use of the software. So the same thing here. You'll see that this user experience right here, they're using a lot of metaphors that we already are familiar with, like a presentation screen, right, or clocks and things like that, right? So they're trying to create this mapping between real world things that we identify as a clock, although I guess I don't know how many people use clocks anymore. But using this metaphor so that it evokes a feeling, right, of recognition, so that I don't necessarily have to think about it, right? I already have an abstraction, and what the user experience tries to do is says, okay, I'm going to try and map what you already know onto what we have in reality, in our particular application, and certainly user interfaces have evolved over time. Some of these metaphors are slowly disappearing, because we don't use anymore certain things, right? We don't use the floppy disk anymore. I don't know if anybody remembers the floppy disk, right? And for the longest time, the save icon, the icon for saving, was this floppy disk, right? But nobody has seen a floppy disk in forever. That doesn't denote any feeling to me, right? It doesn't map to any reality, right, anymore. So some of these metaphors are disappearing, but user interface is really everywhere, right? Anything that tries to interact with a human being needs to somehow adapt to our organic morphology, right? That we have 5 fingers, we have ears and eyes and whatnot, and we grab things, and so it adapts, kind of wrapping their way around us to make it easier as possible, right, for us to use. Some of these interfaces have become staples, right, in our culture, and we don't think about them anymore, right? You could presumably get into any car and just drive it, right? The user interface of the car has evolved and matured so much that is now it's a standard, right? You should be able to walk into any car and just drive it. That's how it has become so successful, the user interface. It could have been something else, but that is what adapted to us. And today we just take it for granted. But user interfaces are everywhere. The ways we wear things, the way we grab things, and not just graphical interfaces, but also physical interfaces. And many of the graphical interfaces try to borrow these ideas that you already know in reality, right? Knobs and push buttons and things like that, right? And radio gauges and things like that you might already be familiar with, and grab them and provide a graphical representation of them, right? So here's another interface that. Did you ever see the time actually set on one of these? All the time. Okay. I don't know if anybody ever uses these anymore. Right. Some interfaces are confusing. Right. Garbage only, no trash. And so it says, how do you interpret this? Right. It might have a specific meaning within that particular context. Right. So oftentimes we don't understand what the context is. And so we fail to understand what the user interface might be. Some of them are just confusing. We don't know how things are laid out and what things are related and what things are not related. Whether the arrow in the right top corner is related to the left text or the bottom text, right? Or where, and again, and the fact that the arrow itself has a meaning to us. Again, it's over time, it has matured, and it has become a universal symbol that we understand what it means, right? That it gives some kind of direction that is referring to something else. These pointers, and it's not part of everybody's culture. Some of them are pretty well designed, and they provide some kind of abstraction of some reality that draws things that are in a straight line. Because they're easier for us to remember a straight line than to deal with reality. In reality, a lot of these lines are very crooked, right? And they have turns and whatnot. But that's not needed for me to understand the abstraction that to go from one place to another place, right? As far as I'm concerned, is enough to understand that it's just going to follow one particular direction. So a lot of these user interfaces create these abstraction levels, right? That remove the unnecessary noise, right? So that you can just focus on the task at hand. So user experience tries to look at the world from the user's point of view, right? Something that a lot of us developers fail to do, right? We measure other folks as having the same capabilities that we have, and we don't feel that a particular user interface might be challenging for someone else, right? If we have a canvas in a window, we just see it as placeholders to fill it in with stuff, right? And it says, "Ooh, I have space, a big desktop. I can put something here on the left-hand side and fill it up with here. Ooh, I have some space over here. What do I fill it with?" And you start feeling even more, right? Assuming that more information is always better, right? And perhaps for a power user, it might be true, right? But for the average user, that might have a much less throughput, information throughput, and you might be overwhelming the user, right? So that's why today, perhaps now that we are focusing so much on creating user interfaces, user experience for mobile phones, for smaller screens. It's actually changing the way we think about software development, right? It kind of forces that, the small screen forces us to think, what are the essential pieces of information, right, that we want to show the user. It challenges us. It says, since the real estate is so small, right, that anything you put on the screen has to compete, right, with other possible content that you want to display, right? So that top the top of the screen is a very premium real estate, right? And whatever you display there better be very, very important, right? So it forces us to not be complacent with let's just throw everything at the screen, right? It really forces on organizing our information technology and what is it that we display when, right? Whereas with larger desktop applications, we tend to just try to overwhelm users with data. So certainly we have to think the user experience from the developer's point of view. What is the developer? What do we want the user to see? What is most important from the user's perspective, right? Not from our perspective. So oftentimes there's a confusion between UI and UX, right? So UX is kind of like the strategy, and the UI is somewhat the tactic of it, right? Of what particular technique you're going to use to implement the user experience. So the UX might be deals only with developing things that are consistent, that there's always a very clear way to cancel something or to pause a very long-running process. That you have these very well principles, right, that apply to any user experience that you implement, and you might not get farther than creating wireframes, right? That it is not your responsibility to make it look pretty. It is the responsibility of the UI folks, right, to make it look pretty, right? What color schemes are you going to choose, right? What fonts? All these other concerns of the UI developer. Whereas the user experience is dealing with the principles on developing the user the interface. So why even bother with this? Well, it's important. It's important about a user experience. If you don't implement a very well-designed user experience, then folks are going to be calling you for support. Say, I don't understand how to do this, and it's probably very, very expensive to have a support team answering things that should have been obvious. Right? If the user experience would have been just that more easier to understand, then perhaps you wouldn't have to pay so many folks answering all these dumb questions, right? So design, it's a fault of the user experience. It's not the fault of the user not understanding. It is the fault of user experience not being clear enough, right? There might be lots of really cool features that nobody uses, right? That folks would love to use if they knew that they were even there. Okay. Again, it's a fault of us thinking about how to best bring this to the attention of our users. Users get frustrated. They might even return a piece of software, a piece of a product that works perfectly fine, right? That actually solves all the problems for the user. But since they have no idea what that's even there, that they might return it frustrated, or they might even tell their friends not to purchase your product. Okay. So here's a couple of products that were dealing in the same space. One of them was trying to look back of past successes of the Walkman and how all that success tried to reproduce that in the digital age. Whereas some newer products were looking for other ways that introducing even novel new ways to enjoy the same content. It was the same music, the same exact content, but a different way at looking at things, right? Ways to interact with content that we didn't think about it. That up until we actually did it and interacted, it became immediately obvious. Okay, I still remember when the iPhone came and somebody just swiped it up, right, and says obvious, right? That's so obvious, being able to just manipulate something, right? And for 10 years already, Windows phones were developing tablets and developing all these portable machines, but their main interaction was a pen, or trying to reproduce or shrink an entire operating system into a smaller screen. So this new way of interaction, where the finger was the main way of interacting, was revolutionary at that point, right? Now we all take it for granted and assume that it's always been there. But again, because it was so obvious once it was shown to us, right? That was a better way of implementing a user interface, right? So yeah, talking about the iPhone, it's not just okay, here we have something, it works, it has all the functionalities, go ahead and make it look pretty, right? It's not just a focus on the veneer of making look things pretty, but how does the overall product work together and gives an entire experience end to end. And with that, I'll leave you till next time. So again, on Tuesday, the client is coming. Please make an effort to be here. I will record it, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be allowed to share it. At a minimum, perhaps I should be able to share it within Blackboard, perhaps. If you absolutely can't be here, I'll make it available there. All right? All right, thank you.